We're on that sheet.
Que me miren. Hello.
Hello.
Buenas tardes. Mi nombre es Janet Farfán. Soy miembro y líder de Se Hace Camino Nueva York en Long Island. Vivo en Bayshore, una comunidad cuyas necesidades han sido ignoradas por el Estado de Nueva York por mucho tiempo. Nuestras escuelas no reciben los fondos que necesitan y los políticos, en su gran mayoría, no han escuchado ni respondido. Nuestra comunidad sufre por una falta de vivienda asequible y los políticos no, en su gran mayoría, no han escuchado ni respondido. Tenemos muchas necesidades y derechos urgentes, pero hemos visto año tras año que los políticos, en su gran mayoría, no han escuchado ni respondido. Mientras tanto, vemos que en Albany sí ha respondido a los intereses de los ricos, que ganan miles de millones en sus hedge funds y en el sector de bienes raíces y dan contribuciones enormes a los políticos. Como votante inmigrante de clase trabajadora, working class, he visto cómo las voces de los ricos reciben una respuesta, pero en la gran mayoría de los casos, la mía no escuchó todavía. He visto ricos para lanzar caristas, inmigrantes y vilifican comunidad. Es por eso que estoy aquí exigiendo una reforma integral de las elecciones justas, lo cual incluiría al menos una contraparte de 6-1 en pequeñas donaciones. 2. Umbrales de calificaciones alcanzables para candidatos viables con apoyo de la comunidad. 3. Límites de contribución más bajos para todos los candidatos. 4. Una agencia de financiación conjunta con oficios y supervisión de candidatos, separadas de la Junta Electoral del Estado.
No, she can continue. I think we'll give you the
Yeah.
sheet so you can translate it.
Yeah.
You'll read it after.
Inclusión de todas las carreras legislativas estatales para las elecciones primarias y generales, así como las carreras fiscales de distrito. También les quiero decir que como votante que he votado en las líneas de los partidos pequeños, he visto la importancia de este sistema para hacer que todas nuestras voces se escuchen. Por lo tanto, les pido que no toquen el sistema después de escuchar. And I want to live for that door smelling democracy. Each one of you, I hope in the future, December 1st, you're going to vote for fusion and support the fusion vote.
Muchísimas gracias. Gracias por su testimonio. Ahora vamos a tener el que cita aquí, él lo puede leer. Va a decir el inglés para que todo el mundo sepa. So we're going to have our interpreter translate it into English so we know what she was testifying to. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Her testimony reads the following. It says, "Good afternoon. My name is Jeanette Farfan, and I'm a member and leader of Make the Road New York on Long Island. I live in Bayshore, a community whose needs have been ignored by the state of New York for a long time. Our schools do not receive the funds they need, and most politicians have not responded to us. Our community suffers from a lack of affordable housing, and most politicians have not listened or responded to us. We have many needs and rights, but it's a year that the politicians listened or responded. Meanwhile, we see that Albany has responded to the interest of the rich who earn billions in their hedge funds in their real estate sector and give enormous contributions to politicians. As a working class immigrant voter, I have seen how the voices of the rich receive an answer. But in the vast majority of cases, voices like mine do not. Worse yet, I have seen how in Long Island this big money has been used to launch racist and anti-immigrant campaigns which criminalize and vilify our community. It's time for a change. That is why I am here demanding a comprehensive reform of fair elections, which would include at least a 6-1 match on small donations, qualifying thresholds for viable candidates with community support, but avoid wasting resources on frivolous candidates, low contribution limits for all candidates, a campaign finance overseen by a board with a candidate services and oversight unit, separate from the State Board of Elections, and inclusion of all statewide and state legislative races for both primary and general elections, as well as district attorney races. I also want to tell you that as a voter who has voted in the small party lines, I have seen the importance of this system to make all our voices heard. Therefore, I ask that you not touch the electoral fusion system. Thank you for listening to my testimony.
Thank you very much and thank you. Gracias. Thank you for translating. We have next Jacob Santha. No. Joey. Oh, I'm going to butcher this. What do you think? Owen Comey.
Oganakomi?
Joy? No. Jane McPartland. Gabrielle Previtt. Evan Fierro.
Evan Fierro.
Evan Fierro. Via
Vigiano.
Luke Davinetti. Roger Meadows. I know you're here.
How'd you know Roger?
Oh, I know Roger. Roger's gonna come up. Roger came to visit list with me a couple of times.
Hello.
Hello.
I want to offer some suggestions. You can focusing specifically on the matching donor thing or whatever. I think that donations should only be matched when they come from the constituency that that candidate is running to represent. Two, as far as the matching donor system is concerned, maybe make it sliding scale. So, donations of $10, 50 to 1 match. Donations made from $10 to $50, 20 to 1 match. Donations made from $50 to $100, 10 to 1 match. Donations from $100 to $100 match. Donations from $150 to $175 or $200, wherever it ends, 6 to 1 match. This way you give people who are at the very bottom of the income scale the most out of the government, seeing that they don't will make politicians more responsive to their needs, knowing that they're getting most of those dollars from donations under $10 that they have to be matched. So you help them out, you help the poor out, the low income out, then everyone else gets boosted up. New York State is #1 in income inequality. It's different from being the #1 poorest state. Poor just means you have no money. We got the money, we're just not giving it to you. So if it's, so pretty much all the money is at the top. It's not getting to the people at the very lowest bottom of the income scale. Okay. I drive for Uber and Lyft, so I'm all over. Okay. I live in Nassau County. I get calls going to the Bronx. I get calls, Queens, all of the very low income areas, and I see what's going on. I see that these people are not having their voices heard. I see versions of Flint, so to speak, just speaking to customers all the time and just finding out, a lot of them are just like, oh, I don't participate. They're not going to listen anyway. They listen to big donors, whatever the case is. At least if you have that staggered out, most likely people, the politicians, the people running for office, they'll be most responsive too. So, yeah, that was it.
Thank you very much.
All right. I hope you wrote that down.
Roger Meadows, thank you for your suggestions. David Cologne. Okay, good.
I'm here.
Good afternoon.
As someone who, as an entrepreneur and investor, works closely with small businesses and startup companies, I wanted to provide insight into how a statewide public financing program that incentivizes small donor participation not only will improve our state's democracy, as has been talked about and testified eloquently by many folks here, but it will also strengthen our state's economy. By way of background, I run Jove Equity Partners, a venture capital firm based here in Suffolk County that helps start and build technology companies located in New York and across the country. I'm also the founder of the Long Island Emerging Technologies Fund, which helped launch and provide seed funding for 10 early-stage companies based on tech developed at Long Island's research institutions. And I'm the founding national board chair of Patriot Boot Camp, a not-for-profit that helps veterans and active duty service members from around the country start businesses. I've also worked to shape federal policy by helping to create and coordinate the bipartisan Congressional Caucus on Innovation and Entrepreneurship in the U.S. House of Representatives. Small donor providers have led me to the petition. In the marketplace, competition for lower prices. Competition through the crucible of campaigns and elections, letting ideas, the challenging of ideas. Our system of financing campaigns in New York State inhibits real competition in both of those realms. In the public sphere, where ideas compete, our system of funding elections has led to the reality that some candidates have a megaphone, while others only speak with a whisper. Thanks to the power of large donations, it has led to the reality that some citizens' views and some citizens' voices matter more than others. There is nothing more corrosive to democracy than that. In the private sphere, where businesses should compete based on the merit of their ideas and benefits they offer to their communities, our system of funding distorts the free market. We now have a system in which businesses' success hinges less on the products they create and more on the campaign contributions they make, as those contributions provide donors with the access needed to shape the policy debate that sets the rules governing our New York economy. Every big company started as a small company. And so in order to grow New York's economic future, we nurture small businesses, new ideas, and employ new workers. However, under the status quo, the needs of small businesses that cannot afford to hold fundraisers and send lobbyists to Albany are pushed aside by those of large corporations inundating state elections with hundreds of thousands of dollars. The playing field is tilted. It isn't a fair fight. And all of us lose when the lack of competition in the marketplace leads to higher prices and inferior products and services. To strengthen New York's economy, we need a public financing system that resets the balance of power and that for the first time will allow the small donations of business owners and workers to have a large impact. Please put our democracy back in the hands of regular folks and our marketplace back on an even playing field.
Thank you. Robert Iperi.
Robert Epperberry.
Epperberry. Erica. Oh, perfect. Sorry, yes. David, I'm sorry.
Afternoon. I'm Erica Lorschbaugh. I'm here today on behalf of the New York Civil Liberties Union. The NYCLU supports the creation of a small donor public matching program for statewide and state legislative elections. Such a program will amplify the voices of contributors and voters from underrepresented communities and encourage more candidacy for office in those communities. We encourage the Commission to bear in mind the constitutional principles weigh in favor of care and restraint when attempting to regulate political speech and expressive activity. Any rule that requires the government to determine or distinguish what or whose political speech is legitimate and how much political speech is deemed appropriate is challenging to reconcile with the First Amendment. So we acknowledge that the Supreme Court has upheld reasonable contribution and spending limits as conditions of participation. Public matching to the Commission to develop simple and forward limits that avoid distinguishing on a contributor or candidate's occupation, geographic location, partisan affiliations, or other affiliations or statuses. Our second recommendation is that the Commission abstain from making any changes to fusion voting that are not directly implicated in the adoption of a public campaign financing program. At its best, we do support fusion voting as a pluralizing factor in New York democracy, and we acknowledge that it could surely benefit from reforms to address the problems that some folks have raised today. However, we believe 5 factors weigh strongly against this Commission involving itself in those reforms. First, no legislative mandate can be used to overrule state constitutional protections for fusion voting. Second, the legislative mandate in this case is not especially clear on the topic of fusion voting. Third, there is a lack of a really firm substantive nexus between the charged topic of public campaign financing and the topic of fusion voting. Fourth, unfortunately, the optics around the Commission's role on fusion voting are becoming increasingly cloudy. And where optics start to look worse, recusal starts to look better. Finally, because the Commission has already voted to bundle its recommendations, the inclusion of a broad change to fusion voting risks acting as a poison pill that would tank the Commission's good recommendations on public campaign financing. Our third recommendation is for the Commission to issue a public statement just clarifying its own understanding of the bounds of its authority. Through no fault of the members here, the general delegation of legislative authority to the Commission is not as clear as it could be. We believe that taking this action will help secure the public's trust in your legitimate recommendations on public campaign financing. And we thank you all for your time and effort.
Thank you. Assemblyman Ra.
Thank you very much. I hope Chairman Jacobs is welcoming you all to Long Island well. What I'm about to say, I want to start with, does not necessarily reflect to me the fact that I think you're all really taking the time to, keep an open mind and look at this issue. And I know it's been time consuming. I know you're traveling around. So I have great respect for the responsibility each of you has taken on with regard to being a part of this commission. But I would start with this as a member of the state legislature, and I said this on the floor of the assembly on the night we adopted this piece of legislation as part of the budget. I don't think it's proper. I don't think it's constitutional. I felt the same way about previous commissions that have been done. And I think that if we want to talk about public financing, if we want to talk about fusion voting, the proper venue for that is in the state legislature, to debate that bill in the state legislature, to have hearings in the state legislature, and ultimately to vote and put ourselves on the record in the state legislature as to how we feel with regard to those bills. When I look at, though, the issue in particular of public financing, we have voted on a number of different versions of public financing during my time in the legislature, from the very limited kind of pilot program idea in the state controller's race to a more, all-encompassing proposal. And the problem I'm going to have with, probably what comes out of this is the same as what I had with that particular bill. Number one, I think people aren't necessarily looking to have their money go towards attack ads and robocalls and all that stuff they love so much. But on top of that, I think it ends up sounding really good. But you have a situation where, number one, there's no identified source of funding, which is an issue with the pieces of legislation that has come before us and is going to be an issue here. And number two, the fact that I think for many incumbents, this would probably be great. You go up to Albany in your off year after your election. You could fundraise and have money come in from all the normal interests that you do. And then when your election rolls around, you can go out in public and say, I'm participating in a public financing system. This is a great thing for democracy and all of that. And you kind of end up having it both ways. So again, while I respect, the efforts that you're putting forth in this, I think ultimately this commission should not put forth something that is going to bind the legislature. Perhaps you can really enlighten us on what you've heard, and I think that would be helpful in our deliberations at the legislature, but I think that would be the proper function of this type of body. Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Como. Oh, no, let's spell it.
Good afternoon. I thank you all for coming here today, as I think this is a critically important topic that we have at hand here. And I do have to thank those members of the state of New York legislatures for opening this conversation. By way of understanding my perspective on these things, I should note I, as part of my occupation, administer citizenship exam preparation courses here locally in Long Island. Additionally, I have been very much involved with international working groups in partnership with the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina, as well as in the University of Virginia here in the United States, looking at the depth of workplace democracy, particularly in countries where we have seen structural adjustment programs occur. While that is not necessarily the case of the United States, I believe the gentleman that spoke earlier did speak to the levels of income and wealth inequality that we have here in the United States. And I think this is very important for those deliberative bodies such as yourself or the New York State Legislature, whomever they may be, that have impact on this discussion, take into account the emptying of public resources at the expense of those people who do not have ample resources their own selves. And strictly to say that it is very important that we do have a lower limit on campaign contributions from private entities, whether they are LLCs or similar types of organizations. Drawing from another comment made here, somebody had said that there ought to be a clear reflection of the monies contributed to a local endorsed campaigner, that they be drawn from the representative districts or their own future constituents. I think it's important to keep those boundaries in line. The thing that I would like to most encourage you all to consider in adopting the 6-to-1 proportion for those matching funds is to better understand the way that economics does actually interface with our form of government. And it's to say that I have been myself very involved with discussing with people the repercussions, societal and economic repercussions, when you have a continued disparity in wealth and income in a given country. And when you have an emptying of the social resources, the public good, that has occurred here in the United States over the last at least 40 years, it is very important that we are mindful to begin re-equipping our citizens to become engaged in the electoral process, because after you have situations such as those in Argentina in 2001, you can just now talk to folks and say, how do you begin to repiece your society together when you have had multiple governments thrown out? And know and can readily identify that a difference in wealth and income have a impact deterring people from becoming participants in their own governance. So I hear the chime. Long and the short, hands off fusion voting. It's a different conversation for a different day, though critically impacts what goes on here. Do support the public funding and matching.
Thank you. Thank
Thank
you very much. Greg Fisher. Mhm.
Hi, I'm Greg Fisher, and in full disclosure, I am currently a candidate, the third candidate for Suffolk County Executive. I'm a registered Democrat. I have been a committeeman in the past, and I have been cross-endorsed. And this time I am actually, though I am a registered Democrat, I'm running as a Libertarian. I'd first like to talk about matching and why its importance for its approval, but a qualified approval. First is, we have a phenomena, which is costs are doubling approximately every 15 years, while median incomes are flat. That is squeezing the middle class into the working poor. If they're to participate in democracy at all, we need to amplify their voice. New York has a financial crisis, the nation has a financial crisis, and clearly the newspaper shows very concerning reports about what the comptroller has found about Suffolk County's crisis being the lowest rated county in the state of New York. I believe that if approved, that the matching fund should be phased in over time, like we did for minimum wage. It should be for small amounts and within the constituency only. It should not be from outside the constituency. Next, on fusion voting. As I said, I have been a beneficiary of that. I do approve of it. We've used it this cycle to be a tool to combat racism and sexism. And let me tell you how we did that. After I was named by the Libertarian Party as its top candidate for its ballot, I did take efforts to review the entire Libertarian ballot and the ballots of all the other parties. And what I noticed, for example, in the 10th Judicial District, which is Nassau and Suffolk, is it was whiter than white and maler than male. So we basically had a lockdown ballot by all the larger parties, Democrat, conservative, Republican, independents, working families, and a cross-endorse across the board of an all-white, mostly male, except for one female, ballot. Here's 5, pick 5, and that's it. So there really was no choice, meaning that somebody on there or multiple people on there were just unelectable otherwise. So we named 2 candidates as Libertarians, one being a black woman, and if she's elected, and I hope she is, she will be a historic event, being the first woman of color ever elected to that district. So we're able to actually combat racism and sexism by virtue of fusion nomination Wilson Pakula. So where I would issue a caveat there is I would not want the two top parties to name minor parties. I would want, they have the distinct advantage of the funding and empowerment of having a board of elections that's bipartisan. It really does exclude all the other parties. So I would not want to give them the additional advantage of cross-endorsing other minor parties after that. And that's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate your work, and it's good to see familiar faces again.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good luck. Jay Schumfeld.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this and for coming to Suffolk County. I wasn't planning to speak today, but just after listening to some other people speak, I thought I'd share a few observations. In my career, I've worked for Democratic elected officials, and I've also been the treasurer of a congressional campaign and ran a couple of corporate PACs, so I'm somewhat familiar with the uh, financing system. I am actually very glad that the people from the State Board of Elections came this morning because I had no idea that there was actually talk of having somebody else other than them run it. I think that would be, in spite of whatever issues they have, that would be a ludicrous mistake to put that somewhere else and have divided responsibility for this. I think in and I think in the so the idea of lower another way to achieve your goal is lower contribution limits. That has actually that worked reasonably well in the federal system until some of the recent court decisions to get more contributions and have a broader base of support. So that should be you should consider that regardless of the other recommendations you're making as well. I think actually, and I've heard a lot of talk about cross endorsements today. As a Democrat, my party has suffered from it and benefited from it over time. Probably more suffering than benefiting, but that's it goes out here in the suburbs. But I think Legislator Fisher actually, for all the people who said there's no connection, Legislator Fisher made the connection when she said the people who are on the ballot with multiple lines getting 90% of the vote, they don't need money. I think also and I want to thank the people from the Working Families Party who explained what an opportunity ballot was, and all the time I've been in some local stuff, I never knew what that was, and it's an abomination, frankly, to hear that people who are not in a party can not even, besides, getting a line through a process, just independently try to upset and interfere with another party's process. I think that's terrible, and I would hope you would find a way to ban that. The last thing I want to point out is that some of the challenges you're going to have are come where you have the regulated part of whatever you're doing meets the unregulated. So you can have regulated finances and regulate how much money you're going to give to people, but at some point that's going to come up against the price of printing or whatever, and so there's going to be some bumps there, and how you work that out over time, whether or not there's enough money for candidates to keep the system going. And then lastly, I think the other part of this is some people made up or spoke is about the how you transition this in. I think to do it while people are allowed to keep all the money they've accumulated would be very problematic. So with that, I thank you for your time, and thank you for.
Thank you. So he was actually the last speaker that we have signed up. I'm sorry, you were signed up?
Okay.
Oh, so maybe it's okay. You can come up, and then after you, you'll be the last one. State your name at the podium. Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Casey Marlowe, and I'm a political science student with a bachelor's from Queens College. And I'm not going to talk about money in politics today because I think there's consensus on it. That's a problem. I want to talk about fusion balloting. As a lot of people will know, outside of this room, where there's a lot of informed people, outside of this room, political ignorance has largely become the norm. Fusion balloting is confusing and muddles the ideology of the parties. When someone runs on a bunch of lines, it's confusing for a lot of voters to know where they stand on the issues. If a candidate runs on the Democrat, Conservative, Working Parties, and Independence lines, which happens sometimes, it's confusing to tell where they stand on issues that matter to voters. And also fusion balloting gives tiny independent parties, oftentimes with no actual views and are simply rent-a-line parties, with a few, of course, notable exceptions, to have undue influence on the political process. This often leads to smaller parties trying to hold larger parties hostage and make deals in order to get on their line. The smaller parties then do hardly anything when it comes to securing the candidate's access to the ballot. And a lot of these parties are not going to even exist in 4 years. And yet they get to have an undue influence over the political process due to the said transactional relationship. And one argument that I keep on hearing from people is that people want to vote for their preferred candidate, but not under the label of Democrat or Republican. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. So these people won't vote for their preferred candidate if they're only under the major party label. I think that just shows that those people are really ignorant about who their preferred candidate really is. People love to rail against a two-party system, but in truth, there isn't really a viable option at all that we could just go to. And fusion voting isn't the solution as it brings the previously stated problems. Idealism, at least when it comes to fusion balloting and breaking the two-party system, feels good, but it rarely gets anything done. Let's just focus on getting money out of politics. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. Have a great day.
Thank you. So this concludes not the meeting, just the public speaking. So thank you very much, everyone. And now we will continue to executive session. Should we take a 5-minute break or go? I'm sorry, not executive. Open session, just not without the speakers. Yes, we have the agenda. Okay, so let's take a 5-minute break and then continue on. Okay. No, you don't sing. No, we gotta go to the restroom.
I sent an email yesterday, but what it does is, for those who are listening in, number 6, as we discuss number 6, it will subsume numbers 1 and 2. And my point very briefly was that, having thought about this, I think that limiting the match to contributions from the district does 3 things. One is it encourages the candidates to do what we want them to do, which is to interact with their constituents. Number 2, it eliminates the need to differentiate and deal with differentiated matches between in-district and out-of-district contributions, which was a legal issue that had been raised. And it also eliminates the need to deal with differential AMIs. If we do it, I think the match has to be higher than 6-1, but I think we can resolve all that and really focus the candidates on dealing with their constituents and seeking support from their constituents. And that was my email yesterday, and that's the recommendation that I'm making today.
Is how will that affect the participation level? Won't that reduce the number of candidates because they'll be limited in where they can raise matching qualifying a matching fund, where they can raise contributions that qualify for matching funds. And it could really limit the number of participants and uneven the playing field even more between participants and non-participants. And I asked Professor Malvin if he can comment on that. If we limited the match to only in-district contributions, how would that affect the level of participation, if you can comment on that? Yeah, candidate participation.
So you have to talk with your hands. I grew up in New York. That's fine. I can talk with my hands. But this means I can't. Anyway, the memo I sent you, is it only 8 days ago? Anyway, that I said then showed that if you have no money matched from out of district, obviously there's less money in the system, and more candidates will feel that it's not advantageous to them to go into the system. If, as a matter of concept, you want to do something like that, what I'd suggest you do is you think about how much money, what's the target amount that you think a candidate needs to have, and not begin by settling, it should be 10-1 or 8-1 or 12-1. As this gentleman, the last person who spoke, said for some contributions, 50-1. But to say, how much do we have to do for candidates for candidates to feel they will be viable. I frankly, based on the numbers we did for the last meeting, 10 to 1 or 12 to 1, and it's only in district, and you triple the number of donors or you do more, that really doesn't get you a very high number for most candidates.
Can I just make one
Yes.
point before I see Larry raising his? It just seems to me, Henry, that where we're looking to increase the match through the AMI, those are the districts that probably need the most help. So when you limit the poorer districts and can only match within, I would imagine that people would opt out of the program so they can raise the money from out of the district. So we're disaffecting the actual areas that we're trying to help, if that made any sense.
Except that they can still raise money from out of the district. We're only going to match it from within the district. And that encourages them to do it. And, people who are going to raise large amounts of money, large donations, aren't going to participate no matter what we do. So we're looking at people who are raising the smaller donations. They'll continue to raise money out of district or in district. We're only giving public money for those people who deal with their own constituents.
And how would we say that we're looking at the New York City model campaign finance board as a base when they allow people to be matched within the whole city? And then we're limiting it to just their district.
Well, I think our policy purposes may be a little different, because what I understood, and this is where I was trying to get across the last time, I think, is that what I always understood is we're trying to do two things, but the primary thing, I think, is to give public support and to encourage local candidates who have grassroots support in their district the extra financial boost so that they can run. I know I see that, where I am on Long Island, difficulty I have at times. And I'm one of the people, by the way, the person testified today said the first question they get is not, what do I stand for? How much money can you raise? And can you raise? I'm a person that asks that question because that is, and that's among the reasons why I favor public finance. That is an important feature here. But I also ask the question, how many volunteers do you have? How many people can you put in the street to help you? And those would generally come from their district. So as a public policy matter, while, I believe that obviously people can raise money from wherever, California, frankly, anywhere in the United States of America. When it comes to putting public dollars in a matching form behind contributions that come in, if we allow it to be the state, for instance, as the limit to where you go, what you're doing then is you are ignoring that whole concept of local support. Because frankly, if I'm running from, I grew up in Forest Hills, Queens, so if I'm running from Forest Hills, Queens, I mean, what local support is it if I get my money from the Upper West Side of Manhattan or other places?
But you still have to qualify within your district.
Yes, you qualify for matching within the district, but then even if you match out of the district, I'm not saying you can't get money out of the district, but the public taxpayer is paying. Then what's the public policy aspect to be supporting your in-district support? Because it isn't in-district support at any point they matter. That's the question.
Well, I think the issue is. Can I say something? You're not ignoring the in-district support because you're having a higher match for in-district than out-of-district. Have a higher match for in-district than out-of-district, and that therefore take into account greater weight given to in-district support.
Yeah, you still need to draw down, you still need the availability of funds to draw down the public match. And this is a conversation we had in the last meeting, of which I think these points were raised and were dismissed because there was a recognition that there wouldn't be enough funds available within a district to do that. And when you're talking about, especially assembly district, I would imagine it'd be very difficult to have a donor base there to draw down an adequate match. And the candidate, of course, can raise money unmatched out of the district, but why even spend the time in the district if you double your contribution limit and raise the money as a non-participating candidate and being able to raise larger sums from around the state? I just don't know. I don't know if it if the squeeze equals the juice here in terms of how small some of these districts are, how poor some of these districts are, for the participation that I thought was the goal. I just think it's going to have a detrimental impact on that, and I certainly support as much district involvement as possible, but this might be counter to those other goals.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of quick points. First of all, Henry, I'm not aware of any reason why you can't have a legal reason why you couldn't have a different level of match or different rules for in-district or out-of-district contributions. I would say, and I'm all for emphasizing connections between constituents and their representatives and increasing the match that's in-district. I am very concerned, though, that if you have no match for outside districts, and you have the kind of contribution limits that you have all been discussing here, that what happens is candidates raise the small amounts that they can inside their district, and all of their fundraising outside of district goes for the big donations. There's no motivation for going for the smaller donations out of district. And you all are aware that your statutory charge here is increasing incentive for raising small donations and reducing reliance on big donations. And I'm afraid that if what you do is say there's zero match for outside donations, there is only a motivation to raise very big donations outside.
It will go to our goal, which is to make everyone's voice be heard, regardless of what their income is. So you will be encouraged 10 times, 8 times, 10 times, depending on the match, to stay in your district. And by stay, you want to hear everybody. You want to hear, if it's a 10-floor building, you want to hear every single floor, every single resident that live there, regardless of how many people is in an apartment. So that would encourage the person to go door by door and make sure that they have the same principle or the same morale as the people in their district. So let's say if people want a better schooling or better funding, they're going to make sure they vote for the person, and their vote will be counted. And that person running is going to go out there and make sure that everyone there, it's in agreement with their views as well. So that will give them a louder voice and know that their $10, depending on what we make it match, if it's 8, will be $90. And they know they're making a difference. Oh, my 10 is almost 100. I know we can all try to get here at $10, and you get your whole family together. And that'll make sure that everyone is being heard, regardless if they have a job, if they don't have a job, if they were living on Social Security. So it won't even discriminate amongst people in age, because they'll make sure that if you're elderly and you're receiving social benefits, that even if you give to $5, that will make a huge contribution to the person who's running. And whatever your views are will have to be heard to the person running.
Could we perhaps just consider it as an alternative, splitting the baby in the sense that there's a lower match outside the district, perhaps just throwing a number out there, perhaps 6-to-1 up to $100. And then within the district, it's 8-to-1 up to $250, and then they're still seeking the smaller donations outside to get the amplification, but they are concentrating most of their work in the district because it's a higher match.
And that's an option, but also can we explore where we're concerned that the districts have low AMIs? Can we explore, based upon those AMIs, raising the match in district specific to those districts?
Yeah, to say, in the numbers that I ran and sent you. In the AMI actually made less difference than we expected. It would seem to me, and Ms. Vargas, I think your point is correct about one of the really important goals you want. Another is that candidates who participate in the system should be able to run a viable election and have enough money to do it. I don't think that I don't think you can come to that judgment about where to fit. sort of based on instincts about whether you like in district or out of district. I actually think you have to try and run a model and see what it would take. Uh, could you do it on 12-1 in district? Well, if it's the minimum number of contributions, or if it's $10 a head, 750 donors matched at 12-1, that'll get you a total of $36,000. Is that enough? Does the candidate need to be able to raise more? Do you anticipate they can have more than 750? The conversation ought to be occurring with real numbers in front of you. And what do you need out of state or out of district in order to make sure that you don't only run the $2,000 ticket cocktail party for donors out of district? And again, that's something that
But we'd have
if we don't have to run too many different models, because these are not easy things to do, that's something we could actually do. Lay it out in columns for you. And
Isn't working under that assumption, though, that the public financing is the only fundraising mechanism that they have, to the exclusion of the out-of-district's donations?
no, that's not what I'm assuming.
Well, but
What I said is that the matched money would come. I was throwing out a number. What would you get?
But Michael, even in poor districts, not everyone's giving $10. There are going to be larger contributions. There are going to be $50, $100, $150, and $200 contributions,
course.
all of which are matchable. So if you're going to get 750 contributions, they're not all going to be $10 contributions.
75 is your threshold number. I multiplied it by 10 just for the sake of
Yeah,
throwing something out.
But if you get 750 contributions, it's not going to be $7,500.
There's nobody who's remotely close to that number now, but okay, if you do. It's all I'm saying, Henry, is that it's a somewhat, it's an interesting idea. You put it out yesterday, and if you'd like, give a little time. We'll actually give you a comparison, and you can make a policy judgment based on seeing effects.
Well, I just want to add a couple things. One, the point that was raised when we had this discussion in the last meeting was part of the objective is to combat the independent expenditures, and for a candidate to be armed to do so, it requires a broader donor base. And two, I think that we're looking at this a little too narrowly, in the sense that it's not all monetary. If I'm a candidate in district and 90% of my matchable contributions are out of district, that becomes a political liability in the district I'm running in. I'm going to have to explain, and I'm imagine my opponent's going to use that against me. So there's a disincentive to focus your efforts, even if they produce superior monetary results. If it looks like you're coming into the district and you don't have the support there, and you're being supported by somewhere else in the state, that's problematic for the candidate as well.
But David, if I could, on the practical of it, and I agree with you in terms of the optics among those who look at it. I will tell you on a practical basis, having been involved in lots and lots of elections, and we've used that, and it just never resonates with voters. That's not a thing they're thinking about. They're thinking, my taxes going up, my tax going down, this guy good, or this lady not good. Those are the things about it, where they get their money from. We call that inside baseball.
But Jay, I mean, in this situation, your taxes are going up because your candidate's raising money from constituents they don't represent directly. So I don't know if it would translate the same. You may be right. It's people ignore things that we think they would find important. I'm just raising that as another issue that someone would have to deal with if they were focusing on out-of-district contributions.
And Michael, I think you have to look at a model in which there were 225 contributors and the average contribution is $100, or 400 contributors and the average contribution is $50, where they're going to max out on their public funds.
Also, one of the gentlemen, I just want to play this because, again, in spite of what Ms. McManus had to say, I did actually pay attention today to the hearing. And there was a gentleman, and his name was Roger Meadows, and he stood up there, and he gave an idea that struck me very, as really unique. he talked about, why don't you have a much larger match for the lower dollar? Up to $50, he meant $50. I just did a little playing around. If we did, just argument's sake, if we did an 8-to-1 match on $250, we're talking $2,000. So you know what that goes for. But if we just went down from 250 to 200, that's the max, to 200, and we did 20 times on the first 50, 10 times on your second 50, 8 times on your third 50, and 6 times, maybe, but that's what computers are for, and 6 times on your last 50, you'd end up with $2,200 or 11 times your match, but you would then be giving a magnifying boost to the lower dollar amount. And I would even be willing to play with that on the upward side on the lower dollar amount.
So how do you deal with in that scenario? Because I was thinking the same thing. Someone gives 50, it's matched at a certain amount, then they give another 50. Now you actually have to claw back potentially or readjust the two.
No, it's your next 50. In other
But
words,
I thought he scaled back down as you started to get
no,
back
no.
up.
What I'm saying is the first 50 is 20 times. So you're getting $1,000 on that first. Your next 50 is 10 times. Yeah.
So if you gave 100, you'd get a 30-to-1 match on your.
No, you'd get 20 on the first 50 and 10 on the second 50. That's just like the income tax. Same thing as the income tax.
And if you look at the New York system, which we occasionally do, when you do your filings, you list how much they've given and how much they've given previously. So it's right there on each filing. So if somebody gave you 50 and then gave a second 50, it would show up as, I'm giving 50, but I've already given 50, or be reported. So they will have gotten or qualify for the match on the first 50, and they'll qualify for the lesser match on the second 50.
But from a legal perspective, aren't you amplifying the voice of one person over the voice of another in the district? Isn't that
No, because everybody that gives $50 on their first 50, they get 20 match. Everybody that gives the next 50, they don't give more money, you don't get a match anyway.
I know, but instead of me giving 150, I'm going to give 50, my brother's going to give 50, and my cousin's going to give 50.
And then you're going to get arrested.
Excuse me, just want you to know that it would not, the numbers are much smaller, but the approach is not unprecedented. When Roger, I didn't get his last name, spoke, it reminded me of Montgomery County, Maryland, where the first 50 is matched. It's actually 6-to-1. The second 50 at 4-to-1, and the third 50 at 2-to-1, and they actually have a $150 contribution limit. Again, it's a concept that's, it's an interesting concept. You just have to see if it generates the total that you want.
Right.
And if you want to match it with zero out of district or not. But a variable match rate is in existence somewhere. I don't know that it's been.
I like the progressivity of it, and it also helps out in that AMI concept. Where we want, because the problem in the lower AMI districts, the districts that don't have the financial strength, is that you're going to have a lot of people who are going to give just $10. That's a lot of money for a lot of people. The average person in some of these communities, $10. That's not easy money.
So Jay, if you adopted the sliding scale concept, then you wouldn't need the AMI differential.
That's exactly right.
And that would be
exactly
it
right.
would be easier to administer, I think, than the AMI.
I'd still propose the AMI for the threshold, because I still think that a candidate getting on board, making that dollar threshold, we've got to modify. It's too high for some districts. It's too low for other districts in certain cases. And I think we have to modify that. And that would not be administratively difficult to identify.
Well, I don't want to change.
I agree with Michael. First of all, my recollection also that Montgomery County has looked at something like this. Can you hear me? Oh, sorry. I'll bring it closer. So yeah, in concept, I have no objection. I said this before, but I think if you are not going to match outside contributions at all, you really have to take another look at your contribution limits. I really think that changes everything. Because you don't want a situation where people are just looking to only at the biggest donors outside. I think that runs counter to, frankly, what your mandate is here. Only looking at the biggest donors for any contribution that comes outside their district.
you could maybe achieve the results that amplify the in-district contributions with a sliding scale, with a real high level for the first 50 and then the next 50, and still allow some level of match for out-of-district contributions.
I think the out of district is where I run into difficulty, but I think that maybe if we could take that suggestion, look at the non-participant contribution level, go back, revisit that. I got the numbers. We could play with it a little bit to bring that down so the encouragement is there. Because your main case is this, is if I'm getting it right, is that you don't want us to create a system which, because it's so restrictive, it takes candidates out of it, and they'd rather go with the larger contribution elsewhere.
I heard a second issue. It was that if you are a participant, you don't want an incentive for them to raise only max contributions outside of district. And so he was also saying for participants, you might want to bring the max contribution down as well as for non-participants if you go to this method.
I'm struggling a little bit. Like, what are we solving for here? Is it that the voices of other people outside your district don't matter? Because if I'm a small donor who lives in another district, it takes a body, right, a collective body to actually get something passed. Why is it not my concern that a legislator in another district, one that I can't vote for, but ultimately will be voting for legislation I care about, why my donation wouldn't be matched?
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Isn't that it doesn't matter, because you can give the donation and it does. It doesn't get matched on the basis of the fact that the whole objective of this finance program is to reward grassroots in-district communication, and it's not to reward out-of-district communication. And so what I'm just saying is for taxpayer dollars and watching taxpayer dollars, there's no public policy benefit in terms of the communication and the relationship between the candidate or representative and the community when you're getting money out. Not that you shouldn't get it, but you shouldn't be incentivized to get it by getting a match.
That's something you're asking us to agree to, right? I don't think we all agree that that's the same public.
We're gonna have to vote on this.
Yeah,
I mean, we
'cause I was
don't
like,
agree.
I don't agree
Some
with
people
that.
don't agree with it, right?
Public policy benefit. I think all New Yorkers have an interest in giving small contributions that are matched with taxpayer dollars in order to incentivize people to hear the voices of small donors in our electoral process.
Well, certainly you have little communities. Like I live in Saratoga Springs. I guess for upstate New York, we're an affluent community. Now, someone could be running in Schuylerville that might be just outside my assembly district that might be more easily able to raise money, to your point, in Saratoga, and the same issues affect me in Saratoga as they do in Schuylerville. So I think that's the point she was trying to make. Or a lot of these assembly districts are carved out where little pieces sit in other towns and things like that. And
But then, okay, so
I think it should be a lower out of district match and a higher in district match and split it, because I think the ability for people to draw down from the pool of public funds that are accessible to them is going to greatly diminish if you don't match the out-of-district contributions at all. So maybe just a nominal contribution and then amplify the in-district is my position.
So then, using your same example regarding Schuyler and Saratoga, so let's say that Schuyler, since it does affect you because it's right next to you, wants to build a big statue, right? And it so happens that it's part of your view. Everyone in Schuyler wants the statue there because it represents any principle that they're going for. But you really don't agree with it. So even though it's something that the majority of Schuyler wants, let's say 85% of the people living there want it because
I
it's
don't
part...
give money to that candidate.
No, I know, but then you're going to give money to the candidate running opposite, right? And you don't live in district, so your money is going to be worth 4 or 5 times, and it doesn't agree with the locals that live in Schuyler because you just don't want to see the statue in the backyard
Except
of your
for
house.
if everybody in Schuylerville agrees to the statute, that candidate's going to win, and I'm going to have my view blocks.
It depends how many in Saratoga Springs goes for the opposite candidate, and their money is being matched by tax dollars. And it takes away the voice from the little people that live in Schuyler.
Then perhaps the New York City Campaign Finance Board should limit it to in-council districts then.
Well,
Right?
I have a
Not the whole city.
I have a question.
Okay.
And in the words of
Okay, Kim.
Mr. Berger here,
Maybe we could be on that commission next.
Okay,
keep it simple. I think we need to answer the question. I've listened to organizations talk about who we're giving a voice to. And today, I can't tell whether we're giving a voice to the candidate or whether we're giving a voice to their constituents. Does that make sense? Whose voice are we trying to amplify with campaign finance reform? Are we trying to amplify? I'm not looking directly at you, Professor Melvin, but are we more the people? So if we're more concerned with amplifying the people's voice in the district, it makes sense to me that we would reward or we would amplify their voice, which by way of money. I mean, money is speech. So we would match those in district.
At a greater, in my opinion, is I agree, at a greater level, perhaps a much greater level. I just worry no matter how hard you work in some of these districts, you're not going to be able to get the public pool sitting there. You're not going to be able to
That'll make you a competitive candidate. Because that's, again, the ultimate concern is, one of the ultimate concerns is that you're not going to increase the voice of the people in district and the poor people if the candidate doesn't participate in the system because they think they're not going to get enough money to run a competitive campaign. I think you have to look at that as a threshold issue. We want people to participate. Want candidates to participate, because if they participate, they'll be raising money from their districts, and they'll be raising small contributions and amplifying the voice of those contributors.
Are we able to run numbers though, based on an in-district map, based on only matching?
Yes, of course, but with, you have to make some assumptions about how many people would give and so forth. But to address your question, there's been experimental research on this, on do donors give more in response to a higher match when it's partisan entity telling them it's a higher match? The answer is no. There has to be a messenger, a carrier of a message, a mobilizer. And the best mobilizer is the candidate, or the next best would be the party. So you've got to get the candidate to want to participate in the system to have the effect you want, accepting the fact that the main effect you want is to get the engagement of the people who the candidate wants to represent. So then you're going back to, no, you're not there to amplify the voice of the candidate. You're there to amplify the voice of the constituent, but you need the candidate for that to happen. People have to want to participate. It can't be like a presidential system where you say, I'll be darned if I'm going to participate in that because I don't get enough money. So that's where the candidate comes into that equation.
I would just say I'm slightly concerned. On the one hand, we want to create a system that incentivizes the voices of everyday New Yorkers to weigh in and have a part in the process. On the other hand, we want to make it so complicated that neither candidates nor individual New Yorkers understand how to navigate the system or feel incentivized to use it. And in some respects, the clock is ticking. And I would like for us to think about proposals that are sound and have been tested that we know will actually work. The only thing that I hear us being afraid of as we have these conversations and limiting further the pool of people who can have a voice is having an actual democracy where people can weigh in. If we are so concerned about small districts where there's, fewer people who look like some of us than others who can give and have their voices heard, and therefore there will be more challengers to those candidates, that's not a bad thing for democracy, right? To me, there's like this boogeyman that's in the back that we're all hiding from of like, there are going to be more people running for office in districts all around the state. Me personally sitting here, and everybody should know this about me, is like, that's good for democracy. And if we're not designing a system that actually is going to lead to that, then why are we sitting here? Like twisting ourselves into pretzels to create a system that hasn't been tested, running models that aren't actually viable in the end when no one's actually going to use the system.
Now, I'm going to just disagree a little bit. First of all, I think what's good for democracy is incentivizing people in district to be participating in the election of their own representative, the people that actually are there to represent them. That's good for democracy. That's why I'm favoring in district only. I don't think it's good for democracy necessarily to have, wealthy people from outside some area pumping money in and then having some portion of that money, up to $250 under the model we've got, that being multiplied 6 to 1 or whatever the number is that's multiplied. I just don't think that's necessarily good for democracy. I think it helps lubricate democracy so that you can run a campaign, but I don't think that it necessarily has anything to do with representing the people. The people are represented by their own representatives. And so I'd like to move this along. So I'd like to make a motion that we have all, I'm going to take on Henry's point. I don't know why I'm doing this for you, Henry. Why don't you make the darn motion? I'll make the motion. Okay, I make a motion. We can shoot it down and move on, or vote yes and move forward. I move that all matchable funds are matched only in district. Is there a second? There's a second. It's been, any further conversation?
No, thank
No,
you.
let's do a roll call.
Skylar can. I would vote third.
I would like to see if we're actually going to test this. The system has to work as a comprehensive system. To make all these isolated decisions, to me, doesn't seem like the best approach to this when we don't know whether or not this approach would lead to a viable candidacy. So I personally don't think it's ripe for us to vote on this motion in this moment.
Remember something, everything is preliminary. Everything we've done is preliminary. So we always have the opportunity, if the numbers come in and we want to change it, but we got to move to the next part of the model. That's what I believe. We got Mylan here. Mylan, are you still hanging in there? Oh, comment?
Just,
I have to turn this down.
I think the light's still on. This is on, correct?
Yeah.
Just before the conversation moves on, I do want to underscore that the Brennan Center has studied how candidates engage with their own constituents under a small donor matching system that also provides a match for donors outside the district. And we found that participating candidates in New York City system are engaging with their own constituents, raising a larger share of their money from their own constituents, and making those constituents more important to their campaigns than their privately financed counterparts who are running to represent the exact same constituents for state assembly. So I would just urge the commission to take that into, I'm sorry.
Could you repeat it? About
So we studied the effect of New York City system on constituent engagement, and we found that even with providing an out-of-district match to candidates for city council, that those city council candidates are still engaging with their own districts at far higher rates than candidates running to represent the exact same neighborhoods for state assembly. Small donors and in-district donors are far more consequential to those races without eliminating an out-of-district match. So I would urge the commission to keep that in consideration. And to the extent that the issue of, how do we balance these considerations and make constituent donors more important, to Commissioner Galvin's point and Commissioner Nona's point, that's precisely why the Brennan Center has endorsed a higher in-district match for local.
One of the things we talked about early on, and then I'll wrap it up unless somebody else has something to say, is we were concerned about matching dollars to 250 of donors who gave way more and magnifying, and we couldn't figure that out. Remember that? Well, I'm gonna venture to say that it's more likely that a candidate for office will be going out of district looking for money, not limited to 250. They're probably going for large dollar amounts, because if you're going out of district into the fancy cocktail parties I'm so familiar with and the rest in Manhattan and the like, and I don't mean to pick on Manhattan, but that's where a lot of them take place, and all of that, you're getting $2,000, $3,000 a clip from those folks. And so you're getting the big money. If you want to take big money out of politics, if you stick to the local district, now, of course, there's big money in like districts where I live and come from, but in the vast sum of these districts, you go up upstate and the rest of it, the big money is what you want to get out of the system. Then you want to get out of the system, you want to put into the system only in district, because there's less chance you're going to be finding that big money in your individual districts, unless you come from a very wealthy district.
Why wouldn't we match like $100 donation out of district where they can only give $100 and not the $2,000 a plate?
The match only applies for someone that gives $250 right now. What we've gotten to right now, it doesn't apply. It doesn't apply to someone who gives 2,000 and their
Yeah,
first.
no, yes, it does.
No,
That's the first 250 of your.
but we can eliminate that.
Yeah, but we can't because administratively, we talked about this, it becomes nightmarish, I think. Well, there's a motion that's been seconded. Can we start with that and then move from there? Otherwise, we're never going to get anywhere.
On what Denora said, I think this also encourages more candidacies. If you've got community-based people who don't have contacts out of the district, they're community-based, this will encourage them to run because they know that they're going to be competitive with people who may have contacts outside the city, but who are going to depend on in-district money. You're encouraging people who don't have the broad financial reach because they know that the people they can reach can have a significant economic impact on their campaigns. And you're going to get more local community-based candidates out of this.
You want to start down at the bottom?
Yes, so let's start. All right, let me put the. I'm going to keep tallying. So let's start to the left. Oh, okay.
So I'm making notes on this, right?
I vote no. I believe there should be some out of district match as well as district amplified match.
Commissioner Galvin votes no.
I vote no pending some modeling that suggests that this isn't going to be a death knell to participation.
Commissioner Previtt votes no.
No, for the same reasons.
I can't hear you. Commissioner Nona votes no. I vote yes. Commissioner Jacobs votes yes.
Milan? Sorry.
Yes.
What's your vote?
I vote yes for the following reason, and I have expressed this to the groups. I do not think we should be matching large donations out of district at all. I don't think that's a good use of public funds. I think the point of this program is to encourage people to run in district and to raise small donations in district. So I think that this is definitely worth exploring and has my vote at this point.
Okay, yes. So I would like to thank Kim for your scholar example at Schuylerville and the statute. So I'm voting yes. Thank you, Kim. I'll continue on.
I vote yes.
I vote yes.
I vote no.
And I have to learn to push the number. Okay. So as it stands, we have 5 votes yes. The motion passes for in-district, 4 votes no. And I will record that as I say, all votes are preliminary because we have the whole package to come up with. And to Commissioner Previtt's point, that we'll take a look at numbers as they come through and see what else we come up with. I would suggest it's now 3 o'clock. And what's your time? What's everybody's time schedule? I don't mean to step on your job, Commissioner Vargas, but what's everybody's time?
Well, I'd like not to be driving it too late.
Okay,
Back to work.
you've got to go. Okay,
She has this 8-hour drive.
8-hour drive, and you're very important in all of this since you're taking half the group. That's right. Okay.
Can I raise one point
Sure.
that needs clarification that I had a conversation since our last meeting, and I admit I was confused by this, and I don't know if the rest of the commission is confused as well. With respect to qualifying amounts and donors, it's come to my understanding that the way the New York City program works, correct me if I'm wrong, is that the threshold amount can be raised from contributions that are within the contribution limit of a participating candidate. Meaning, if the contribution is the contribution limit is $2,000, $2,000 goes to your threshold dollar amount that you need to raise. With respect to donors, that's where you need to have the number of donors that we specify between 5 and 250. Is that how New York City works?
No.
That can't be.
New York City only counts New York City only counts matchable contributions towards reaching the threshold amount. So if you give $2,000, only 250 of it counts towards reaching your $5,000 or $7,500 threshold.
Otherwise, what you would have is in the assembly, where you have a $7,500 threshold, two donors at 4,000 each would qualify the threshold as long as you got 75 people to give you $5 each.
I was thinking of it the way that Commissioner Berger just explained, but someone I thought had explained it differently, and I was clarifying what it is we were saying that requirement entails. So
just for clarification again, so I'm in district, my limit's $2,000. Somebody gives me $2,000. The first 250 is matched at whatever the ratio, and that $250 that was matched goes into the kitty to meet the dollar threshold amount. Okay.
That's right.
I have a question for the commissioners that voted yes on the last vote. At the last meeting, we discussed this, and we agreed, and this was unanimous. For Senate and Assembly, after the threshold has been met, contributions from $5 to $250 from anywhere in state will be subject to the 6-to-1 match. And I want to know, share with us what changed your mind, because that was only 2 weeks ago. No, it was less than 2 weeks ago.
I guess I should be the first one seeing that I wasn't there at the meeting.
Right.
So I technically
So
didn't.
you don't have to tell us why, because you didn't change your mind. You weren't there.
I gave my proxy. I did give my proxy, but I didn't. Well, you're right. So I wasn't there. So I didn't change my mind. My first vote.
But I did.
And you're the one that made the motion, so
Right.
you're the one that should explain
No.
this.
He made the motion. I just started the conversation. But, as I thought of it over the weekend, I was really concerned that we weren't doing enough to encourage candidates to work within the district. And that was really the driving force on it. And, and I'm still concerned about that.
Are you concerned at all about not getting the number of candidates to participate that we want to participate because of the limitations on the matching grants?
I think if the match is good enough, they will participate, and there will be more than enough money to run a viable campaign, and there'll be a level playing field.
What's the ratio then? If it's not going to be 8-to-1 and it's going to be limited to in-district, what are you suggesting?
I think we should be looking at the variable. I think it really makes a lot of sense.
The first 50 to 100?
Well, I don't know whether it's 50 to 1 or 20 to 1 or something, but I think we can make it significant enough that
Variable on the amount given. In other words, $50 gets a 20 to
And
1.
we all agree if the modeling comes back that 20% of the candidates will make it or participate, we'll revisit this issue? We can revisit it anyway.
But
So Malvin has a comment.
the money, the modeling isn't going to tell us whether they're going to participate. The modeling will tell us whether there's money available so they think they can run a viable campaign.
May I make a suggestion? If you were ready to spend what our cost models, we sent you cost models. We said, you're in the neighborhood under any of your approaches of around 40 million a year on matching money. So if you're willing, if that's the amount you're more or less willing to spend, then the question asks is, okay, what should the matching numbers be so that we end up spending around 40 million?
That's exactly right. And maybe you could come up with some ideas on that. And if you could take a look at, if I can impose upon you, and you've done an awful lot, and we all here appreciate it. And I know we say it to you individually, but I know everybody feels it publicly. Want to let you know that we appreciate the work that you do. If you could take a look at this concept of magnifying the matches based on the lower amount, it's very, to me, I think the other members as well, very important that we produce something that is meaningful so that those who are at the lower end get a stronger magnification. The AMI was the first proposal. That doesn't have to be the end all. It could be something else. And this idea that this gentleman came up with here at the hearing today, I just thought was ingenious. I started playing with it. It just seemed really, really very good. And I have to tell you, whereas we were comfortable with $2,000, and I can only speak for myself, meaning 8-to-1 or 6-to-1 was less, of course, $1,500. But we're comfortable with a higher amount. on the multiple of the aggregate match, be it, we're at 250 now, if it had to come down to 200, however it works, I don't care if the match amount is higher, and especially on the basis of the fact that we're talking about the same $40 million. It promotes, the program gets more people involved, is more progressive, and I love the fact that it's district focused. And if we can accomplish all that, that's terrific.
I don't think, the match ratio is without political consideration or taxpayer consideration. There's something completely different to say we're matching something at 6-1 versus 20-1 or 50-1. I think the public may have a more difficult time, especially if there's no precedent, if we're deviating from the gold standard in New York City, to say we're amplifying the voice of $1 to 20 taxpayer dollars. I think it's something that we have to keep. There should be some limit to that, 'cause I think people would have to explain why we're putting so many tax dollars to $1 donated.
And I just want to, on the record, with due respect to New York City, dispute that it's the gold standard. There was a gentleman who testified today, and I noted that in New York City, in the last cycle, they had to claw back or needed to recover $2.16 million in taxpayer funds, something along those lines. That was what was testified to. Whether that's exactly accurate, I know there was some bit of it, but I don't know that has to be the standard that we follow. We can set a new course and be creative and different in that matter, as long as we meet our objectives, I think.
And I would like to answer your question, John, if you want to hear it. What I would like to say is, in the last meeting, my thoughts were one way, but now actually working it through with Kim, I would like to say it was a perfect example because that has happened to districts in the Bronx as well. So let's say the same example about Skylar, then if you give them a voice, right? By them, I mean the district, even if it's next to you or another county, even if it's small, some of my districts are very poor in the Bronx, right? So your neighbor district can have a lot of money. So let's say if you go to the Dogs Neck area or the Riverdale area, it's very different than if you go to another one. So if that area doesn't agree, let's go back to my example with the statue, right? Regardless of what the statue is, it represents a morale or a principle. Press the button.
Then we should.
Let me
But I'll leave it as that.
Just say to
Thank
Rosanna, Rosanna, your friend and my friend Gustavo Rivera, I don't live in his district, but I donated money to him and helped him get elected. So,
Exactly. Thank you.
a progressive person could do that.
Point in case.
Commissioner Burgess, I just make one point on this is that
Voted against matching any out of
I know,
district.
but who said that? I'll take it back. That my vote was for Gustavo.
Well, this is violent. Can I say something? When I give money out of district, which I do frequently, I do it because I believe in that candidate's values. I do not think my contributions should be matched or even necessarily carry the same weight as somebody in district. And I do think that is different. We want to encourage people in district to have a voice and be active, not me out of district.
Well, I agree with you that they shouldn't be the same. They should be weighted the same.
You're cutting me off, which I don't like. I thought you were finished. I'm sorry. Okay, so that's it. And also, I would like us all to remember, this is preliminary. So I still want to hear the data, and I said that. And I think that we should continue our discussions as collegially as possible and try to get through as much as possible and revisit things as frequently as possible. I am not a believer in adhering to something just because we did it once means we have to stick to it at all. So that means it could change again. So I think our positions are entitled to evolve as we get exposed to more information or learn different things. That's all.
And the last I would say was we have to make a decision at some point, and time is running out.
Well, that's where, so far we're here, and then we'll see where we go. Here's what I would suggest. We've got a meeting in Buffalo a week from now, and we're not going to have time, I would suspect, because they're plane schedules and the rest, unless it ends early, and then we can spend some more time on this. And then what we have is Or we vote on it and let everybody have their hair on fire. I don't know. So, Kimberly. Yeah, no, we won't. But what I would like to suggest is, I know we have the 13th, and I asked everybody to hold the 14th also, just in case. So let's do that so that we can get a lot of our work done. Hopefully, we get it done on the 13th, but just we'll get a sense amongst us, on the 14th. We may have to do an overnight. Okay, well, there we go. We'll have a nice
Aw,
dinner and
thank you,
have
Kim.
social time together. It'd be very nice.
One other point I just wanted to raise, as I'm thinking about the last meeting, I recall several votes were conditioned upon an AMI issue. Now that AMI sounds to be off the table, to John's point, we have to kind of review everything we did because those things were all part of that discussion. So I just want to raise that, and obviously you've indicated several times we can revisit all of these issues. I'm just raising the fact that kind of changes some of the rationale behind some of the voice.
AMI might be off the table in terms of the match. If we go to a higher standard match, you don't need it. That's what we're saying. But the threshold piece, I think we have to visit and take a look at that. Well, then you'll be joining my club.
Does that conclude the meeting?
May I ask it? Part of your official meeting, but may I ask for some guidance on something?
Yes.
Because you asked for some work.
We asked for a lot of things from you.
So, and I'll come up to you and try to get, but is it clear? Because I wasn't planning to go to Buffalo, nor can this work be done.
No, but can you
before
email
Buffalo.
it to us?
Are you going to have the next discussion where this work might be useful? That discussion will be on more or less November 13th
In Westchester, right?
in Westchester. Anyways, I'll get it to you before November 13th, so it'll be useful to you. It's okay. I used to live in Niagara Falls. I know where it is. Okay.
John, we have the 13th confirmed at Westchester Community College, so we'll get that noticed for sure. And then we can.
At the 14th?
Trying to confirm the 14th.
Can you confirm coughing?
But if anybody wants to stay over, I can send someone.
Yeah, you should. That'd be great. Thanks, John.
That concludes the meeting. Thank you very much.